Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of The Healing Home. I'm your host, Michelle, and today, as I feel like I say every episode, we have a very special guest. But honestly, this shit is epic, and I'm so excited. This is a man that I have wanted to talk to for a really long time for multiple reasons. The biggest reason being that he wrote a book called Now is the Only Thing That's Real, which is a total mind shifter when it comes to the Manson story. And so when I first read his book back in 2017, as soon as I read it, I was like, I want to interview this man. And I didn't even have a podcast at that time. I wasn't doing any even social media stuff. I just knew instinctually too. I was like, well, I'll probably interview him at some time because this was just such a paradigm shift for me, being a person that was researching Manson for years leading up to that point, and then reading his book and being like, okay, this is a totally new lens and this is awesome. So Neil has authored other books too. Your Thoughts Are Not Your Own. He has a volume 1 and volume 2. He has been researching mind control and all sorts of things with propaganda and marketing for nearly 2 decades. So, this is going to be a good one. I'm really excited. And before I bring him in, I just want to say thank you to all my patrons. As always, you guys are awesome. Keeping up with the support has been really great. We just really appreciate all your support and everything you guys share. So without further ado, help me in welcoming Neil to the stream.
Hello.
Howdy, Neil.
Hi, Michelle. How are you? Thank you very much for inviting me on.
Oh, yeah. Thanks for being here. Super excited. And this is going to be great. So before we get going, for anyone who's not familiar with you, if you wouldn't mind just giving a quick intro and shouting out anything you'd like to let people know about yourself.
Sure. My name is Neil Sanders. I was primarily interested in mind control, which is, MK Ultra and various sort of British programs. And it kind of breaks down into sort of 4 regions, really. One is the use of certain chemicals for enhanced interrogation techniques, so basically like truth serums and that sort of thing. The second sort of category is training people to be resistant from the thing. The third would be very, very broad, so propaganda, which also sort of ties into ideas of advertising, marketing, changing people's perspectives and ideas through propaganda, essentially. In fact, propaganda, marketing, a lot of people don't know this, but, so marketing, you're advertising stuff on the television and stuff like that. Originally, it was called peacetime propaganda. And Edward Bernays, when that's too obvious, we can't call it that because everybody will realise what propaganda is because of the sort of wartime. So they actually had to come up with a phrase which was marketing or advertising. And so the advertising itself is marketed to the public. And then the fourth area of that would be the sort of Manchurian candidate. Sounds a bit sort of science fiction-y, but sort of taking over control of a person, either through drugs or machinery or hypnosis or anything like that. And then lastly, I got interested in the Manson case initially, if I'm brutally honest, because there's, as I'm sure your listeners know, there's like a trope that goes through the Manson milieu that he might have been mind controlled himself. He might have been a part of a CIA plot to destroy the hippies. So basically, taint them with his sort of bad smell and basically just make them look bad in the eyes of the general public. And there is an element of that. There is an element of that in the Manson case, but it actually came after the fact, where basically certain groups, essentially the Weather Underground and various other sort of quasi-political organizations and protest groups were trying to frame the Manson murders as like a sort of class act, as if it was something where basically it was a political movement, like, an attack against the rich or something like that, which it just wasn't. It was a drug murder, essentially. Like, it was a drug deal that went wrong, and they concocted a whole sort of story around it in order to basically protect the Hollywood elite from the fact that they were involved with grubby drug dealers from Southern California, essentially. But yeah, as I was sort of researching it and such like that, I came across some of the work of Nicholas Schreck and started basically absorbing anything and everything in the Manson milieu, and before you realize it, or before you know it, you realize that there's actually stories behind the stories. And the mainstream story, the helter-skelter story, so to speak, is incredibly flawed and implausible. So I wanted to write a book about it and try and sort of, if only really to try and get it straight in my head, to be quite honest. I wanted to sort of like, you know what I mean? If you can get it down on paper and make it make sense and appraise all the different theories that are out there and see which is the most likely or which has got the most evidence to back it up, basically. Since then, what I've been doing is, or more recently, I've got a podcast with a friend of mine called Brent Lee. And it's called Someday I Call It Conspiracy. And what we do is we like to have a real deep dive into conspiracies of the day, like did Kubrick fake the moon landing? What is on Hunter Biden's laptop? Are chemtrails real? What actually happened in Bohemian Grove? And stuff like that. And the World Economic Forum, cultural Marxism. We've done a few. We've been going for about a year and a bit now. So like basically we've done a few episodes there on Spotify. And Spreaker and places like that. And so, yeah, what we try and uncover like the source of these theories, find out, you know, if they hold any water, where they came from, who promotes them, and just pick them apart like that, basically, just to sort of like to get all the detail out of it.
Yeah, brilliant. You know, I have to be honest, I just had realized that you had a podcast, like because I was preparing for the show and everything. And I was like, oh, awesome. This is great. And I listened to a few episodes so far, and I love the angle of getting deeper into these conspiracies, because there's a lot of conspiratainment out there. And I think when you look at the truther community, if you want to call it that, you know, there's all these cul-de-sacs, there's all these ways to get people all up in a tizzy and get stuck in a lot of places.
Very much so.
You know, and then just become these regurgitation machines of all the conspiracies that they've heard over the years, but never really getting to the bottom of it, you know, never really understanding what's really going on. So when I saw that you guys are doing that, I'm like, yes, we need more people doing that instead of just spitting, you know, continuing to spit all this stuff, which is fun to spit, you know.
Absolutely, yeah.
You know, here we are going to spit, you know, for a good hour and a half about a bunch of stuff, but, you know.
It's not. Some people think it's a debunking show. It's not really a debunking show. It's wanting to find out the truth and find out, you know, was Alex Jones the first person to break into Bohemian Grove? Was he the first person to film the ritual? That's what he says. Like, is that true? Let's find out, basically. Because you're exactly right. Like, the problem is that the conspiracy world, the alternative sort of media, it's well, like everything, it's basically faced challenges with the concept of social media. Like it used to be a lot more sort of sedate and a lot more sort of, oh, you think this, do you? Oh, that's interesting because I think that. And have you read this book? Because this book has got a completely different perspective on it that you might enjoy. Now if you don't believe that, you're obviously working for the government. And there's a huge amount of, you know, there's two phrases. Like one, don't trust the mainstream. Like anything that the mainstream says, the opposite is true, which is obviously not the way to go, because that's the world. If only the world were that simple, wasn't it? Like, you know what I mean? And then this concept of doing your own research, which is fine if you know how to do research, but if you're doing your own research is going and watching somebody else just tell you something for an hour, like this is the problem with the conspiracy world. And I was as guilty as anybody else, because it's an underground thing, isn't it? Like, it's totally underground. You don't really get to sort of compare it to other stuff. So if people are telling you plausible things about, I don't know, that chemtrails are real, and we know that they're real because we've studied the aluminium content in the soil or in the water or whatever, then you basically take that on face value and go, okay, that sounds reasonable. And because that happened 20, 30 years ago, do you know what I mean? When the initial documentaries came out, like what in the world are they spraying and stuff like that, it becomes like a truism within the community. And one of the things that we were finding and butting our heads up against was that in the same way that people who are beholden only to the mainstream would say, I know this to be true because XYZ says it. It's exactly the same in some areas of the conspiracy world, that basically it's like, It's supposed to be you're supposed to be free thinkers, but if you're just repeating what David Icke thinks without putting it through the filter of checking to see if you're real, or if that resonates with you, or whether that's accurate, this is where the problem comes down. And it's just as bad if you're going to an alternative source, but you're not applying a level of cynicism to that information. In the same way that you should apply cynicism to mainstream media and understand that there's a spin to it, often a political spin, often a spin that's connected to some sort of financial or monetary gain, like, you know, their sponsors or who it is that backs that media organization, or even the sort of presenters and stuff like that. But the same thing holds true within the alternative media. And as you put it, this concept of conspiratainment, there seems to be this idea. It's ironic in a sense, because like I was watching like one of the very prominent members of the alternative media community saying, "Oh, so they're always trying to keep you in fear. It's all about fear." And it's like, you've literally spent the last year telling us that vaccines are that this is going to kill you, or that they're going to round us up and put us into camps, and that the 15-minute cities means you won't be able to leave your neighborhood. It's fear porn. It's in a lot of cases, and that's for two reasons. One, because if we're honest, people like to be slightly afraid. In fact, there is a scientific logic behind that. Okay, when you get frightened or angry, it releases a dopamine response, and so people kind of get, like, in the same way that you get addicted to going to horror films or roller coasters, or even, like, you know, to a sort of greater degree, you know, doing meth or speed or something like that, because it shoots off all these like receptors in your brain. You can get that through outrage and through being sort of slightly fearful. And then the flip side of that is that certain people within the alternative media have sussed this, and they go, okay, this is what sells. Whoever's symbolized the hell cell, absolutely spot on. This is the point. If it bleeds, it leads, and people like excitement. Okay, and again, this doesn't necessarily mean that there is no Illuminati or elites, or that there aren't systems that are basically there to sort of control you to a degree. But this concept that you're fighting against this sort of sometimes reptilian intergalactic order or whatever, and it gives people a sense of purpose. It means that you're not just like, you know, you're involved in something bigger. The best example of that is QAnon, because I mean, personally, I think it's nonsense, right? Okay, if anyone listening likes QAnon or thinks that it holds water, good for you, right? Okay, I think it's daft, but I think that it was very cleverly designed, because anybody that wants to be involved in that is not a bad person. In fact, they're very good people, and they probably see themselves as very righteous, and they have very nice values, particularly around sort of like, you know, well, let's just not muck about. It's about saving children from the elites and from underground lairs. They're either being, you know, abused or ritually sacrificed for adrenochrome or whatever. So if you're part of this idea of QAnon, you're literally fighting against that. And that's a good thing to do. To fight against those sorts of evils is a very good thing to do. The problem with it is that it's made up. It's a bait and switch, right? What is the actual outcome of QAnon? It's that you vote in a particular way. It's that basically you have allegiances to certain values that align yourselves with certain political ideologies and certain political organizations. And so the children in the tunnels, that's just window dressing. I've described QAnon as politics for people that are into wrestling. And I don't mean that as disparaging against anybody that's into wrestling, but the point is, the wrestling is how you direct your money to the McMahons, say, or to the television organization or whatever. QAnon is basically to get you to vote for Donald Trump, or for people that espouse that sort of those particular values that those parties have. And this is the thing about conspiracy. It's become very, very popular, partly through sort of negative exposure, like Sandy Hook and Alex Jones and stuff like that, and partly due to the rise in social media. And that mechanism, that sort of, I'm just asking questions. They might seem outrageous as questions, but I'm just trying to provoke a conversation. Has been utilised by a lot of the media now. In the UK, we've got like GB News and stuff like that. Fox News, particularly Tucker Carlson, until he got oiled for doing that exact thing. Again, it's this outrage milling, and this actually came from I can't remember the bloke's name, the guy behind Rupert Murdoch. I can't remember his name. There's a really good documentary. I think it's called the Brainwashing of My Dad. Roger Averman. I can't remember. If anybody knows the guy, he's essentially the sort of business brains behind Fox News, and he noticed this in the 90s that basically if we change it from news to opinions, and we get people angry by basically telling them that their world or their worldview is about to be altered from forces outside, and there's nothing that they can do about it. Be that, I don't know. But again, that same mechanism of like, we're under threat, we're a collective, and this is happening, and it's somewhat out of our hands, is seen not only in the sort of mainstream media, but it bleeds backwards and forwards into the conspiratorial landscape and such like that. And so this is why we wanted to do that podcast, because basically, again, we saw it in ourselves. Brent's been involved in conspiracy for years and years and years. And one day we're just like, hang on, we're not questioning this. It says question everything, doesn't it? And there's certain things that we're just taking for granted. And there's other things that we just basically go, that's nonsense, isn't it? But we'll just ignore that little bit of it and go along with the sort of broader theory or whatever. And it's just a danger, because like, it's just that's how people associate with that. Thank you, Roger Ailes. Yes, thank you, Venus Australia. Thank you, Venus. Yes, Roger Ailes, absolutely. And it was, and again, because he realised that that's a really good business model. Get people scared, tell people things that actually make them angry, but position themselves as sort of fighting against that, and they'll come back for more and more and more. And again, you see that in the conspiracy world a lot of the time. I just wanted to make it absolutely clear. That doesn't mean that the conspiracies don't happen. It just means that mechanism has been somewhat hijacked. And in some cases, it's been hijacked, right? Okay. Because there's certain swathes of people who've just noticed this demographic and gone, if I say X, Y, and Z, they will send me money on Patreon. Right, like, do you know what I mean? And we all know who those people are, right? Okay, so, and then there's another group of people who've probably been doing this for years and years and years, not necessarily made as much money as they might out of it, and notice that, you know, if I say this, my audience doubles. And so they'll start to justify saying stuff that they don't believe or don't necessarily believe, because that's what the audience wants. And who am I to deny the audience? Well, you know, but that's where the responsibility should come in. That basically, you know, are we about the truth, or are you about being lionized? Like, because if that's it, if you just want to stand up in front of a group, you know, a room full of people and have them tell you how clever you are, that's fine. Okay, but that's not. It's not the point of it, is it? Okay, like that's if anything like a sort of, you know, a perk of that sort of thing, and that shouldn't be the prime motivating factor.
My gosh, I agree with so many things that were put on the table just now. And I love that this is where we're going. And I just have to shout out Symbolic Studies, who is my fiance. And he is the one that he actually introduced me to you years ago. And, you know, with the hell cell thing, we've attached this to the Manson mythos as well, as looking at Manson being kind of like, you know, there was this hell cell with Manson, I think, and what Mario, his name is Mario, he brought up, like, Manson basically was the hell cell for possibly the New Age movement, to move people towards more into that New Age movement that was already happening. I mean, we're talking Aquarius explosions,
Esalen Center and stuff like that. And and what was his name? Jolly West was involved in that. Jolly West, Jolly West was a CIA agent and interested in sort of drugs and that sort of thing. He moved to Haight-Ashbury to study the hippie in their natural environment. But he was heavily involved, in the CIA were heavily involved in that sort of new age movement. Oh, I can't remember the human potential movement, or the free potential movement, something like that. And it was all kind of based around Esalen and various sort of bits like that, because this was an emerging thing. And at the time, I mean, I'm sure it still goes on, but like, we'll have to wait 30 years for people to discover what's happening nowadays. But they wanted to understand these potential movements that were sort of, enchanting and entrancing huge groups of people, and figure two things out. Well, three things, really. Can we control people? Is this dangerous to society? By which they mean the status quo. And if so, can we get in on this and basically direct it into ways that we want, that we think will be less harmful, or whatever. And you saw that as well with, so yeah, this is a strange thing about the New Age movement, particularly that it was sort of a lot of it was to do with sort of CIA when it started. Latterly, it's weird. It's been adopted by quite. And then again, this is nothing against the actual discipline itself. Meditation, eating well. These are all very, very good things that people should do. Like, I mean, you don't have to. I mean, I don't.
No, but
it is. I should. Like,
yeah. There's always nuggets of gold in all of these things. There's the thread of truth throughout the ball of yarn of lies, what have you.
But it's strange that that's gone right from one end of the political spectrum to the opposite end of the spectrum. Like, the sort of wellness and sort of stuff has been very much embraced by the internet manosphere and stuff like that. The keeping yourself pure. I mean, obviously, like, the connotations connected to purity, bodily purity, racial purity. So that's why certain groups really like that. I mean, like, crikey, if you actually look back to sort of 1939, Hitler regime, all the propaganda was about young blonde girls and young blonde boys dancing and, doing exercise and being very, very, very fit and very, very like fighting and stuff like that. And that fetishization actually has been sort of adopted to a degree, again, in politics, not necessarily completely far right, but like, we've all seen the pictures of like Donald Trump as Rambo and stuff like that. And it's like, this is a 77-year-old man, right? Okay. Like, like, he may still be like, wired up on Adderall or whatever, but like, he doesn't look like Rambo. And this concept of this creation of a sort of idealized stereotype, either with that you want to achieve or that you want the people that you live vicariously through to represent, is a bit weird in some cases, to be quite honest. Like, but again, this is the problem that we live in today as well, because of the sort of scale of social media. It doesn't matter what you think, it doesn't matter what you believe. You can find somebody, you can find an entire group of people who will agree with you and will back you up, whether you're right or wrong. And so this is another massive problem that we're living now. We're in the age of information, where basically people can find out anything with their phone, right? You've got a computer here. You can find out the facts about anything within seconds. But for some reason, people don't. Like, they tend to sort of rely on somebody else to find the facts out for them and regurgitate, as you were saying at the beginning, it's regurgitation of like tropes or memes or like, truisms that and people tend to sort of have they'll have these little factoids or nuggets or whatever, and they're not there to open a discussion. They're weapons in a war. And it's like, how many bullet points have you got and how many bullet points have I got? And if I've got more bullet points than you, I win. It doesn't matter if none of mine are true. Like, that's the silly nature of social media now. It's this instant gratification, like, and people are lazy. Like, just because you've got access to all this information doesn't mean that you can be bothered to sift through it necessarily.
That's a great point about the bullet points, and kind of, it's like the posturing. And I think a lot of this, I think, is put out. Well, all right. I think the reason for this being the way it is it all comes down to the avoidance of self. And
Mm,
so if you're distracted all the time with everything else, you're concerned with this, that, the other thing, this person, that person, you're totally taken away from like what's your purpose?
yeah,
What do you really think about it? Like who are you? Who are
yeah,
you really? Are you able to form these your own original thoughts and things like that? But because everybody's so many people are distracted by this stuff, I think like that's one of the reasons why people seek others,
yeah.
before themselves, to actually just even ask the question like, is this actually valid, or like does this resonate with me or is it just something that someone else said, you know?
No, totally, totally. And the other thing, the problem with that is as well is that basically how whatever everyone's sort of kind of expected to present themselves in social media, and it doesn't matter how good you are at something. There's going to be someone on social media that's better than you, and tie this in with the fact that basically. Everyone lies on social media. Everyone exaggerates. Everyone pretends that they're having a fantastic life and stuff. Oh, I'll tell you about factoids in a second, actually, because there's a thing about factoids that gets on my nerves. But like, anyway, so everybody, so you're all almost in a position of jealousy and trying to prove yourself as better than all these people. And this ties in with another thing, like, when you go to the supermarket, when you're in a lift or whatever, elevator, they play the music and stuff like that. Do you know why they do that?
No, I
It's
mean, I have an idea, but
it's basically, if you think of your brain, it's got a certain bandwidth, so to speak, and all that whilst it's open, you're looking at things, you're thinking of things, the time's going like really slowly because you're very, very aware. If you can fill a certain amount of that brain power by you having to listen and comprehend music, it alters your perception of time, and it literally dulls your critical thinking capacity, which is exactly why they do it in elevators or lifts, because basically it makes the journey seem to take less time. Same thing with a phone call. If we'll be with you in a second, and then the music, because if you just
right.
heard the dring 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 dring, you'd be more aware of how long you've been waiting, essentially. But with that in mind, and within that in mind, the concept that basically we're all trying to prove one another and we're all trying to sort of compete on social media. Social media does exactly the same thing, right? It's a distraction. It, like, what it does is it overstimulates your brain, and it's what's the phrase? It's something like it excites and overstimulates, basically. And the point being that is actually taken from. Some would say it's coincidental. There's a document called the Kubark document, which is basically a torture manual that was produced by the CIA, and what it says there is to overstimulate the mind. So you stick somebody in a cell, but always have the light on, basically, and stuff like that. And so they can't get to sleep. So they're constantly being sort of like bombarded with information. And what that does is it basically, again, further breaks down your reasoning capacity. You can tie that in with the concept. What happens with social media is also it gives a dopamine response. So let's say me and you are having a conversation or whatever, or an argument, right? And I say something particularly deft and witty, right? And everyone goes, "Oh, brilliant," and gives me loads of thumbs up. That will literally turn my dopamine sensors on, right? Okay. So when you go on social media, you're gambling with either social information or your own identity, kind of, because you can either do really well and everyone will go, "Oh, you're brilliant, you're really, really clever," or you can strike out and everyone go, "Oh, don't like that take. Oh no, I'm really not enjoying that." Subconsciously, your brain's going to notice this, right? Okay. And it's going to start saying, "Well, if I say this, right, okay, I'll get a far better response than I do that." Like in the same way that you learned that if I keep putting my finger in this fire, it hurts, right? Okay. If I keep eating this cake, it's delicious. And so you go, "All right, well, I'll stop putting my finger in the fire. I'll eat the cake instead." Same sort of process with social media. I'll stop talking about this because all it does is get me aggro, and loses me friends. And I'll start talking about this instead, because that gets me the dopamine response. Combine that with the competition, combine that with the fact that you're essentially playing to an audience, combine that with the limited brain capacity that you've got when you're on these things because of the overstimulation and the fact that it basically clogs up your brain. And we're in a right pickle. And that's why we're seeing this, because basically almost everyone, and then the other bizarre thing is that everyone, or not always, but there's a huge thing about people actually go on to social media, as we've discussed before, to be angry. Like Twitter's the best one, like for that, because I noticed this. Everybody on Twitter, maybe this is just me and all the people that I know, but basically they wake up in the morning and go, all right, Twitter, I hate that Lawrence Fox. I wonder what he's saying on Twitter so I can go and argue with him, right? And that's what people do. And it's it's a strange thing. So just going back to that lady's point about factoids, right? Okay. The thing that annoys me about factoids, okay, is that there are two completely different meanings for the word factoid. Factoid used to mean a small pocket of information that isn't true, but is considered true by the populace. But then through popular usage, it now becomes a small fact. And so in the dictionary, there are two definitions of the word factoid that have the complete opposite meaning to one another. And what's even more annoying is that that is a factoid in itself that I've just told you. So, yeah, but hey ho.
Oh, no, I love it, man. I mean, talk about factoids with Manson. It's like, what?
Yeah, totally.
It's crazy. And like I said in the beginning, I mean, your book was just such a turning point for me because it allowed me to look at it through a different lens. And by that time, I mean, we were already digging into alternative information and, conspiracies, and knew that things were off, right? But it was your book that made me go, holy shit, well, yeah, okay, maybe it's not Helter Skelter. Maybe it's not a crazy cult leader who mind controlled these women and men with LSD and all this stuff. And so to get into that, how did you first start? You kind of talked about it, but like, what was the first thing with Manson that made you go, okay, something's not right here? What was the tip off that made you look through a different lens?
Well, the concept of Helter Skelter, there was something that really struck me quite early on, because I was aware of Manson, and then I sort of got obsessed with him and read all the books. And I previously read Helter Skelter when I was a bit younger, and I'd seen television things about him and whatnot. But then I got The Family, and there was a bit in it where Clem is in this lawyer's office, and Manson's gone in to speak to a lawyer. And as he comes out, he sees his young daughter who's about 16 or something. And Clem's there, and he's got no shoes on, he's got no top on, and he's got a snake around his neck, and he's dancing with her. And he's saying stuff like, there is no thing as age, there is something very, very, very creepy. And it was that imagery was like, that would make an incredible film. Like, that's just, and that sort of really sort of piqued my interest. But when I started to think, hang on, this doesn't really make an awful lot of sense, was when I started to think about the concept of Helter Skelter. Now, so that people understand, what the concept of Helter Skelter was, according to mainstream or Vincent Bugliosi, what Manson was concerned about, or what he thought was going to happen, was there was going to be a race war, that the black people were going to fight against the white people, and the black people would eventually win, but they wouldn't be able to control society because they weren't used to being, I think the phrase was, have their hand on the tiller. So Manson and his group would go off and they'd find this sort of a Shangri-La type place. It's like an underground cavern in the desert. And they'd stay there until their number reached 44,000. And then they'd come out and they'd take their place as the rightful sort of leaders of the world. And people, the surviving black people would go, oh, brilliant. Seeing as you know what to do, you can be king or whatever. Right. OK, that was the theory. And so what the prosecution put forward was that the reason that these people were killed, the LaBiancas and the people at the Tate property, was, and also, his name's just dropped out of my head. The keyboard player that Bobby Beausoleil stabs, Hinman.
Gary Hinman.
That basically was framed in such a way that made people think that it was black people that had done these crimes. And specifically, what happened was with Bobby Beausoleil when he killed Gary Hinman, which was a very silly misunderstanding, to be quite honest, which we can get into in more detail. But essentially, the point is that he left a paw print to make it, to infer that it might have been the Black Panthers that had done this killing. And then the theory was that the theme was then run through in the other murders with pig and then political piggy and Howard Skelter itself being written in blood on the walls of these two murder scenes. So that was the idea, that the Manson family had gone out and they committed these two murders. One, high-profile people in Hollywood. Second, a seemingly random couple that had just come back off holiday. That was the point. The point was that people would assume that black people had committed this murder, and then they would rise up against them, and this would provoke the people of color to fight back. Civil war starts. Brilliant. And what struck me about it was, yeah, but that's not what they did. Okay, they didn't then go off and hide in the hole. They escaped out to the Barker Ranch and the Myers Ranch, but Helter Skelter hadn't started. So if that was true, they continued to do that until they saw signs of it starting. Because so on two levels it doesn't work. Because one, they haven't found the place that they're going to stay whilst this civil war goes on. So what do they do? And two, the civil war hasn't actually started yet. So without their help, it might not happen. And so that always struck me as, that doesn't really make any sense. That seems a very dubious, and the sort of selling point on it through the sort of mainstream idea is, of course, it doesn't make sense. Charles Manson is mad. That's the sort of, so he's not supposed to make any sense. And then I discovered that actually that concept, the idea of a race war, and hiding in the desert or the mountains or whatever until you reach a number of 44,000. That wasn't even Manson's idea. That came from a guru called Krishna Ventnor, who basically had a sort of sex cult in Box Canyon. And he preached the exact same thing. He thought that there was going to be a race war between blacks and whites. And he was going to hide in the mountains with his harem of women until such time that he came back and ruled the world, basically. And he was only stopped by one thing, that basically the jealous husbands of these said women decided to turn up and kill him with dynamite. But what happened was, essentially, when one of his followers, friends, acolytes, whatever you want to call him, Paul Watkins, got arrested or got spoken to by the police, he was very familiar with the concept of Krishna Ventnor. And essentially what they did was they took this concept of Krishna Ventnor and overlaid it to Manson and said that was what he did. So the stories of him doing these LSD rituals hanging off a cross at Box Canyon, that's not true. And there's two major reasons that that's not true. One, that was what Krishna Ventnor actually did. And two, by the time Charles Manson got to Box Canyon, that cross didn't exist. It had been removed. So there's no way he could have hung off of that. So it was things like that, basically. And the more you start to pick apart at it and look at it, and you just go, well, it doesn't make any sense. It really just, it's silly. Now, here's the thing. And I don't wish to completely contradict myself, but I'm going to a little. There was a plot. I can't for the life of me remember what there's a book that's about it, basically. There was a certain group of young Nation of Islam black people that had recently come out of prison, and they called themselves the Death Angels. And they had a vendetta against white people. And with guns and knives and various other weapons and stuff, this group of about 5 or 6 of them ended up killing about 5 or 6 people in California. And there is a slight chance that Manson may have heard of this plot, or might have, heard people talking about it when he was in prison. And so in the same way, there's a small nugget of truth there. But the idea, but this is one of the things, again, that you surprisingly you find out. One of the quotes, and I can't remember who it was, but when they were trying to put the actual sort of motive of Helter Skelter, this race war and stuff like that, and trying to infer that Manson was a massive fan of Hitler and stuff like that, I can't remember who it was, but somebody very close to him in the group, the exact quote, or I'm going to get it wrong now, but the gist of the quote is, Charlie hates black people. No, he's from the South. He knows loads of black people. And this is true. In fact, latterly, I mean, obviously this was much later, when he was after the crimes, when he was in prison, he saved the life of Black Panther Geronimo Pratt. So, you know, he was also kicked out of the Aryan Brotherhood for not being racist, or not being racist enough. Let's not muck about, right? Okay, Manson was he didn't believe in, he wasn't a white supremacist or have any far right politics, but he didn't believe in race mixing, which is obviously stupid by today's standards. And even actually, if you read Squeaky Frome's book, she admonishes him for that. When at the time when they were first met, she said that just sounds like pure racism to me. Like, she actually, that was one of the things that they didn't get along about, basically. So yeah, this is the thing. But there's lots and lots of things that you just, when you find out the truth to them, his connections to various celebrities, how close he was to the Beach Boys for a start, and just the sort of the minutiae of the story. Once you really start to pick it apart and look at, for example, one of the things that I did with the book, and shamefully I got this from a Holocaust denier called David Irving. Right, he was once he was considered a brilliant historian, and then he went quite off the rails. He was, when he was conducting a history of Hitler, he said that the way that I know certain things are true is because I've got a meticulous timeline. Every bit of information that I get, I try and put it into an order. So when somebody said to him, Hitler was doing this on this day, he said he can't have been, because I know that he was here. And similarly, there's a story that when Helter Skelter was first proposed, it was at New Year's Eve, and they were all around a big sort of roaring bonfire. And for some reason, Charlie got it into his head to start telling Paul and all of the other kids around him, this is what's coming down, and we're going to have to kill some rich piggies and stuff like that, basically. And that can't have happened because he was 4 hours away at a party at the Mama and Papa's house. John Phillips of the Mamas and Papas was having a New Year's Eve party, and Charlie Manson was a guest there. And this is documented. But if he's there, he can't be over here. And so the more you sort of started to look at it, the more you just went, it's not possible, is it? That can't have happened because he was nowhere near at that particular time. So yeah, this is it. It's just one of those cases where the more you start to read the varying different sort of versions of it, there's, in his own words, there's garbage people, there's the family, and they're all good in their own, they've all got their own different sort of like pluses and minuses. Nick Schreck's excellent but incredibly dense work. It's like, the thing about Nick's work is he's really good, but you've got to know the basics before you jump into it. It's not very forgiving if you just picked it up off the street. It's brilliant once you know what you're doing and stuff like that, and it has some of the most incredible insights that, like, because he actually sort of got to know Manson and like chatted to him and things like that. But again, it's one of those things as well where once you sort of start to pick up little bits and bobs, you can go back and watch his interviews. You know, the interviews that he did with Geraldo and Michael Ben-Harine and Ronald Reagan's Jr. and various things like that, and they're surprisingly revealing.
Yes.
Like although it's sort of couched in slang, and Manson, you know, nobody could deny that he's not easy to listen to all the time because he sounds like he's insane a lot of the time. But if you know what he's talking about. For example, there's a very famous thing with Michelle Ben-Horin, and she's trying to poke him, and he gets really cross. And in the end, he goes, "Fine, I'll tell you exactly what happened, right? Okay, And I'm going to get this wrong, but he says something like, when they got the prostitute on the stand to lie about Lucky Luciano, that's when the entire system went back. And so they had to get her on again and sell me out so that Rambo could continue to make films in Hollywood. And right, that sounds mad. It doesn't sound like it even is coherent. What he's saying is that Lucky Luciano basically made a deal with the American government. And in order to sort of get this was to do with wartime docs and stuff like that, and also trying to kill Mussolini. But basically, they eventually sort of like found that he was not useful to them and whacked him in prison. And the suggestion is that they got somebody to lie on the stand. And he's comparing himself to, or he's comparing that to Linda Kasabian. And basically saying that everything that she said was utter lies. She just made it up. She's just gone along with the prosecutor and created this myth about him being a hippie cult leader, essentially. And when he makes the reference to Rambo, what he's talking about there is Italian, essentially mafia money that comes from mostly from drugs, was laundered a lot of the time through the Hollywood system, and also there's the connection to certain like drug dealings and stuff like that as well. And so what he's saying there is that basically I took the rap. They put somebody on the stand that lied about me to protect the Hollywood system, because if you start pulling on these threads, you're going to find out that this money has come from organized crime, or that these people are indebted to the mafia, or that these producers are selling cocaine, and that sort of stuff. Do you know what I mean? And again, this all turned out to be basically true, really. I can't remember his name. What's the producer's name? The kid stays in the picture. I can't. That was the documentary about him. Robert Evans. So Robert Evans was a big sort of Hollywood producer, and this is one of the people that Manson's talking about. And like the connection to the murders is severalfold, right? One, he was a friend of Sharon Tate and Roman Polanski, and whilst Roman when the murders happened was actually in the UK trying to get a film off the ground called The Day of the Dolphin, which is a story about super intelligent spy dolphins that can talk. It was later made into a film, but it's not very good. And Robert Evans was essentially his producer. He was supposed to look after Sharon whilst Roman was away. And he went to the house and visited Sharon every single day, except for the day that she was murdered. On that day, he phoned her instead. And she said, and this is true, that she wasn't going to be there. She was going to go and stay with a friend of hers called Sheila Wells. Now, later at trial, Blue went up to Doris Tate, I believe it was, and said, "We're so sorry. We didn't mean to kill your sister. We were told that she wasn't there. We phoned ahead and checked," which is strange. Now, what happened was at the last minute, she decided she had a headache, and so she couldn't be bothered to go to Sheila Wells's. So she basically stayed there, and unfortunately, that text turned up, and everything happened. Now, the drug connection is that Robert Evans was kind of known to be a drug dealer, essentially. Like, I mean, one of the things that he did as well was that basically Roman Polanski was his good friend, and when they came home, he put him up in private studios that had recently rooms that had recently been vacated by Julie Andrews, I believe, and let him stay at Paramount Studios. I mean, he charged him. Obviously, you've got to charge him, even though he's a recently bereaved friend. But he did charge him. But he was also involved with a chap called William Mensa and a woman called Lainey Jacobs. And I can't remember the bloke that they killed now. That's embarrassing. But essentially, there was William Mensa, who was a card-carrying Satanist, who at one time was considered to be a possible suspect for the Zodiac murders. He was involved in the murder of a person who's essentially stolen some drugs and some money from from Robert Evans and from Lenny Jacobs, and it was called the Cotton Club murder, and the name will come back to me at some point, but people can look up the Cotton Club murder and find out who the gentleman was. And essentially, Bill Mensa took him into the middle of the desert, shot his head off with a shotgun, put a stick of dynamite in the hole in his neck, blew him up, and then went back and performed some sort of satanic ritual over his body. And he said on the stand that Robert Evans had paid him to do it, basically. So these are the sort of people that they were dealing with. Let me see if I can find out what that bloke's name. Oh, what's his name? Roy Radin. That was it. And Roy Radin was sort of wanted to get into producing and stuff like that. And essentially, what the gist of it was that to finance the Cotton Club film, they were going to sell a bugger ton of cocaine, and he ran off with it and ended up being murdered off the back of it. Now, interestingly as well, there's a lot of suggestion that Manson himself was selling cocaine at times. In fact, potentially to Dean Martin. That was one of the rumors, was that Dean Martin preferred to get his cocaine from Charlie than his regular plug because Charlie's was better. And I had a particular sort of take on that one, was that, you know how they were living in essentially Spahn Ranch, which is close to the desert, and they were stripping down cars and they were making them into dune buggies and stuff.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And it never really sort of made any sense to me. It's like, why are they making dune buggies? What are they doing? They're selling these dune buggies. But they were stealing Porsches and they were stealing Volkswagens and stuff, because apparently the way that those engines are, they're sort of perfectly like for making dune buggies, essentially. But the reason it suddenly struck me is like, why are they making dune buggies? Oh yeah, so they can go across the desert into Mexico, pick up some drugs and come back. That would make sense if you've got this army of dune buggies that can go in places that the police can't go, and they can go in places where there are border crossing potentials and stuff like that. That's where they're getting the drugs.
Dude,
and
that is such a great point. Great point.
I mean, I don't know that to be fact, obviously, but it's like, well, that would make sense. That makes sense more than just selling them on, because they had this great big chop shop that was going at the ranch with members of the Straight Satans, and through that whole sort of milieu, there was the sort of drug dealing, and the Straight Satans was a motorcycle club, like very similar to the Hells Angels or something like that. And again, when it came to the case, a lot of the stuff connecting Charlie to sort of Nazism and even the sort of the proposal for Hell Scout and stuff like that came from Danny DiCarlo. Danny DiCarlo was a member of the Straight Satans. And again, once you look at the minutiae of the case, it's ridiculous, because Danny DiCarlo was the catalyst behind the murder of Gary Hinman. The murder of Gary Hinman was what essentially kind of put everybody on the radar, and led to a series of events that was the ultimate downfall of Manson and the people in his immediate circle. What had happened was Gary Hinman had made a load of mescaline, and he'd sold it to Bobby Beausoleil. Bobby Beausoleil had sold it to the Straight Satans. Straight Satans had come back a couple of days later and said, yeah, you know that drugs that you sold is crap. It nearly killed this woman. I said, oh, right, can I have it back? No, you can't have it back. We want our money back. And they threatened to kill him. And Danny DiCarlo basically took a gun out and put it to him and says, either you go and kill the person that did this, or get us our money or drugs back, or we'll kill you. And so that's what led to Bobby going off and getting into a debacle with Gary Hinman, which wasn't helped by Charlie turning up halfway through due to a complete misunderstanding and smacking him across the face with a sword, cutting his ear and his face. Like, that caused a huge amount of problems. What's bizarre is they basically sorted it out. Gary said, take my car, sell that. You can have that. That'll cover it. I don't care. I'm off to Japan on holiday tomorrow anyway, so I don't really give two hoots. But it all escalated, all went out of control, and basically Bobby ended up stabbing his friend to death. Off the back of that, basically he owed Charlie owed him a favor, and Tex owed Charlie a favor due to the Bernard Crowe Lots of Popper thing, where Tex tried to rip off this bloke and put his girlfriend in it. His girlfriend Luella, sometimes called Rosina, had been nicking from him because Tex was not really connected to the ranch at all. He was a drug dealer in Hollywood, and he'd been ripped off by his girlfriend. So he thought, well, I'm going to get one on her. I'm going to use her as collateral in a drug deal. And so he took her to this house and left her there. Says, I'll leave her here and I'll come back with your money. And then never came back. And basically, there was a bit of confusion. Tex's real name is Charlie. He knew that he'd sometimes stayed at the ranch. So lots of pop-up Bernard Crow phoned up and says, I want to speak to Charlie. Everyone assumed it was Charles Manson. He says, if you don't come over here right now, I'm going to cut this bitch's head off. And excuse my French, but that's what he said. So Charlie managed to rouse up one person, just one person. So this is a hippie cult leader, apparently, that's got complete control over his acolytes. Has to go and do this on his own. Can't like bring anybody with him. And he takes with him this 22 buntline revolver. Ends up shooting Bernard Crow. And basically that's where it all escalates, because basically when Bobby is later arrested for the murder of Gary Hinman, at which point Charlie was actually in San Francisco with a young Jewish girl called Stephanie Schramm, which also goes against the idea that he was Nazi because he's knocking around with this Jewish girl. But when they find out that Bobby's been arrested, he owed Bobby a favor, but he now thinks that Tex owes him a favor. And he says, well, I'll tell you what, cut out the middleman. You owe Bobby a favor. Go and get him some money for a lawyer. And so what did Tex do? Tex decided to go and rob Wojtek and Jay Sebring because they were drug dealers. And that's where it all spiraled out of control. Sharon wasn't supposed to be there. She was there. A lad called Stephen Parents turned up halfway through. They all panicked. Everyone getting killed. Although they didn't actually, because basically he left Wojtek and Gibby alive and went back to the ranch, and then Manson went back to Cielo Drive about 4 a.m. with Tex and watched him kill Gibby and Wojtek. So although Manson never ordered the murders and didn't actually wasn't a physical participant in them, he would be considered guilty of conspiracy to murder and actually probably be convicted of murder for actually being there. And that's if they'd just stuck to the facts, right? Okay, so this is the point. But instead, they had to concoct this idea that it was all part of this helter-skelter and this sort of myth that he was a hippie cult leader by overlaying Krishna Venter on him and stuff like that. And that was to provide this motive, because the real motive was Tex turned up to rob some drugs that he thought were being delivered by a bloke called Joel Rostow. Joel Rostow is connected to East Coast Genovese Mafia. And it wasn't, or only half of the delivery was delivered. And this is why Tex got cross and ended up stabbing people. The other reason was that it was on meth at the time, which is not conducive with sensible critical thinking, shall we say. It tends to sort of make people act rashly. And so that was what happened with that. There's an interesting bit of trivia about the gun as well that was used in the Tate murders and the Gary Hinman, in the Bernard Crow shooting as well, in that it once belonged to President Ronald Reagan.
Oh yeah, that's right.
Yeah, yep. I mean not when he was actually president, but basically when Ronald Reagan was an actor, he used to do a lot of cowboy roles. And there's a bloke called Randy Starr, who was a stuntman. And latterly, Randy Starr worked at Spa Ranch and got on kind of all right with Charlie and the group and whatnot. And as a present for being a good stuntman, he was given the prop gun that Ronald Reagan had used in the film. And then he later sold it to Manson. And that's how Ronald Reagan's gun was used in the murder of Sharon Tate. So... But that's the thing about the case, is there's so many little sort of weird little bits of trivia like that it just is so fun to me, because there's people like Angela Lansbury's involved and Cary Grant's involved and Michael Caine's involved and the Jimi Hendrix Experience and the Mamas and the Poppers and Dennis Hopper. And like, do you know what I mean? And it's just like, that's weird.
I know
and the beach, and the other thing is as well, Although I like stuff like Godflesh and stuff like that. I'm a huge Beach Boys fan. I absolutely adore the Beach Boys, particularly like Pet Sounds, obviously, but like even their earlier stuff and stuff like Don't Worry Baby and Surfer Girl, and like the close harmony stuff is just amazing. And so I'd also learned about the Manson connection very tangentially through I can't remember what the book's called. I think it's called Wouldn't It Be Nice? It's the book that was written by Brian Wilson's psychiatrist that is mostly bollocks, but has actually got some really sort of like fascinating stuff in there. Like, because Brian Wilson, he had a rough old time of it, like in his life, basically.
Oh,
like, had periods living in the swimming pool, periods where he wouldn't leave his sand pit and stuff like that. My favorite Brian Wilson story is after years and years and years, they'd finally coaxed him back into the offices of whatever record label he was under at the time being, and they were all really excited. And he turns up and he's about 400 pounds, and he's dirty, and he's got a beard down to here, and he's wearing pajamas and a dressing gown and slippers. And they're trying to talk and go, so Brian, this is amazing, blah, blah, blah. We're really keen, but we want to get you back in the studio and stuff. And he sat there grumbling away. And I'm like, what's the problem? And he explained that the plants outside had all told him that they were hungry. And so until the record executives went down to the local supermarket and got some tins of spaghetti and buried them with the plants, he wasn't doing anything.
Wow. Oh my God. Dude, crazy. Because, I'm glad we went to the music a little bit, because for me, one of the big mind benders about all of this stuff was being a fan of so many of these musical acts. I mean, we could name them all or whatever, but Dave McGowan was one of my,
Dave McGowan was
my big like poof moments, and we had a lot of older friends around us actually at the time, who were one in particular who was like living in Hollywood during this time, actually rubbed elbows with Jay Sebring, had his haircut. Yeah, his name was Bud. Rest in peace, Bud. But he was our intro to so much of this stuff. And like I was
he knew it. Like
he was there. Yeah. And
wow.
he's like, he worked at Capitol Records, and he was actually a guy that, car stereos were not a thing at that time until they were. And Bud was one of the guys that was like installing car stereos and stuff. So he was able to rub elbows with some of these people, like go to some of these parties. And it was just another confirmation of, once I learned information from your book, I was putting all these things together. I'm like, well, from what Bud has been telling us, and then hearing these things, it's sex, drugs, and rock and roll, baby. And that's like what we're dealing with. And when you really look at it, I really love the connections too with the biker gangs and the mafia, because that also really kind of like drives everything home. And that's kind of one of my bigger conclusions, is that it was obviously a drug deal gone wrong or whatever, but that there was so much more involvement with these biker gangs than what it was talked about a lot. And that's what my research has brought me to, is just like wondering, like, actually who was at the house. I don't doubt that these Manson characters were there, but like, was Danny DiCarlo there? Were there other people there from the biker gangs? Who knows?
Well, this is the thing. There was a boot print that was found in blood that has never been explained who it was. And the reason that people think that Manson was there was that they heard people arguing, one of whom had a southern accent, which obviously you potentially Manson at like 4 a.m. But as you say, there are certain things that are very unknown. Lots of things, lots of mystery surrounds the LaBianca's deaths. The reason for it, how it actually happened, because it's strange. Like, one of the sort of big sort of unusual bits of evidence was twofold. One, Rosemary LaBianca's got a dress on top of her nightgown, which is not something that people would do. Two, the gates were open to the house, but the car with the boat and water skis and stuff attached to it, which would normally be pulled up onto the drive safe, was left on the street with the keys in it. And so, but there's also this other strangeness. Like, they had a dog, and this dog didn't seem to respond to this apparent break, because the mainstream story is that Charlie broke in on his own, tied the two of them up, went back out to the car and said to Tex and who else was it? It was Louise, Leslie, and Linda. Not Linda, sorry. Kremlical, Patricia.
Yes.
It says go in there and basically, do what Tex tells you to do, and then they ended up killing them. But there's all sorts of sort of weird stuff, and it's connected to this little black book. Now, when Manson's asked, he says, "What happened at the Bianca house?" He says, "I wasn't there. I was there to get a little black book, and that was it." And the little black book seems to be connected. Like Lino LaBianca was connected to Frankie Carbo, and Frankie Carbo was a very, very prominent mafia figure. He owed him thousands and thousands of dollars. He was in tune with a race horse that was doing very, very badly, and there was a mess going on. And Manson has said in interviews, he says, "I went in there. I says, I'm coming from the Catholic Church. Don't lie, or I'll kill you. Where's the little black book?" And interviewers just said, "So did you know Lino LaBianca beforehand?" He said, "No, never really met him. I didn't really know him." He said, "Well, then what are you on about?" He says, "Well, he knows Frankie Carbo, and I know Frankie Carbo, and Frankie Carbo sent me to get this little black book." You don't argue with Frankie Carbo. And so there's a suggestion again of sort of mafia connections. Like he was like the other mafia connections is when he was in prison, he somewhat went under the wing of Frank Costello, who was another incredibly prominent mafioso, and Mickey Cohen as well, through his connection to Creepy Carpus, who was his cellmate, Manson's cellmate. When he got out of prison in the late 60s, he was playing at certain music venues, and in order to be able to get that in, because the mafia were in control of the music industry and jukeboxes and payola and stuff like that, which is a whole other sort of topic, he wrote to Mickey Cohen to basically say, "Can my mate come and play in some of your clubs?" and stuff like that, or words to those effects. Also, if you look at Manson's sort of like criminal career beforehand, he was doing two things. One, he was running stolen cars interstate. So he's taking cars like all the way across the country. To who? Like when you're dealing with sort of massive criminal organizations like that, it's an organized criminal organization, organized crime. Who was the organized crime at the time? Predominantly, it's the mafia. When he's running prostitutes in Texas and stuff like that, again, in order to do these types of things on such a grand scale, you need the tacit approval of it's like signing in nowadays. Like, do you know how the rappers have to sign in or whatever? There'll be a similar sort of thing in there. And then basically when he's actually running prostitutes in California, Hollywood, at 3-Star Enterprises, I think it was called. He's running it with, which is essentially a modeling agency, but what they're doing is they're getting young girls in, telling them that they're going to do one thing and then pimping them out. It's a bit like Andrew Tate, really. And he's working with a bloke called Tony Cassini, and Tony Cassini is also in the mafia. Nick Grillo, who was latterly, after Murray Wilson was kicked out for stealing all their money, Nick Grillo was helping manage the Beach Boys. He was apparently connected to the mafia. There's a bit basically where Manson feels that he's owed money for certain songs that came out on Beach Boys albums, Cease to Exist, and there's a couple of others that the names escape me, but he felt that he'd not been paid for that. Whereas Nick Grillo said, "We gave you a motorbike and let you stay at Dennis's house for whatever. You've been paid. You're not getting any more money." And so there was a strange sort of thing where basically Manson said, "I don't," and to Nick Grillo, he says, "Look, I'm not one of these musicians, right? Okay, I'm not a businessman. I'll kill you and burn your house down." And Nick Grillo went, "Oh, yeah, go and do it. Go on. So bring it. And so Manson was, "No, I tell you what, I'm not even going to touch you. What I'm going to do, I'm going to phone New York because I'm ice picking New York." And Nick Grillo turned around and went, "You phone New York, I'll phone New York." Now, what that is a reference. New York means the Genovese mafia. Okay. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that he's phoning New York. If you go back and watch a lot of Manson interviews, if he says New York, the Catholic Church, the High Cross, or anything that basically like is connected to religion is a euphemism for the mafia. Now, Manson wasn't in the mafia, like, but obviously, because you can't. But I mean, for example, like when he's in prison first, when he's just a bit of a crap car thief, he meets Frank Costello and decides to book up his ideas. And what does he do? He goes on a course, a mechanics course in prison. Did he ever actually did he actually be a mechanic? No, but you know what he learned to do when he was a mechanic? Start cars without the key. And then after that, he's out there basically moving cars down to Texas and various places. And so this is the thing. And then latterly he's dealing drugs and stuff like that. These are the circles that he's in, essentially. Like he's a sort of mid to low level criminal that deals with pimping, stolen cars, and drugs. And then another way to look at it, obviously everybody said, well, it's hippie cool. Look at the way that look at the way the girls are around him. Look at this harem of girls that he's got. Right? And there's several things, right? Okay. To be fair to Charlie, right? He's the only person that ever treated some of these kids with any degree of respect. Now, that doesn't excuse what he's doing by any stretch of the imagination, because the flip side of that is you go, all right, so he's targeting vulnerable girls that have got daddy issues. Yeah, he's kind of doing that. But if you don't think of him as like you don't think of him as a cult leader, but you actually think of him as a pimp, then all of a sudden, and even suggest that, I mean, I don't know this to be true, but if like you look at the structure and you go, okay, so Squeaky is the bottom bitch, essentially. She's the girl that keeps all the other girls in line or whatever. And then again, you go through some of the things, and like it was Patricia Krenwinkel that basically, she said two things. One, Charlie had a way to placate angry men. It was called the drop and suck movement. And he'd do this sort of thing with his hand and essentially have to pleasure these people. But she also refers to his girls. She splits them up into front porch and back porch girls, which is a phrase that means your higher quality and your lower quality prostitutes. And again, don't know this to be true, but again, in my mind, it makes more sense that either he's using the tactics of a pimp or he is actually a pimp in order to get that sort of enamorment, that the sort of the devotion particularly from the girls that are following him. And you go, well, what about the guys? He says he's got 20 girls with him. That's why the guys want to be friends with him. I mean, that's literally why Dennis Wilson wanted to be friends with him. But basically, like Dennis Wilson's depressed. He's just got divorced. And he's like, sort of potting around on my own at the minute. And Charlie was like, I've got a bugger ton of drugs and a load of girls, and these girls are pretty easygoing. Does any of that interest you? And Dennis said, yes, all of that interests me. That all sounds tickety-boo, thanks. Come along. And here's the strange thing, right? Okay, again, the myth is that basically he just turned up there and sort of imposed himself on Dennis. He didn't. They arranged a card game that took place at Elvis Presley's house, which is another of these sort of like little sort of like trivia bits, that thing. And he didn't get kicked out. The lease was up. Dennis no longer owned that house. That's why Nick Grillo turned up and kicked the Manson lot out of it. Like Dennis actually wanted to stay with the Manson family. He was basically forced not to by his brothers and the management and the record company. There's even a suggestion that Dennis and Charlie might have been more than just close friends, lovers, in fact. And well, I mean, one of the things that we know about the Manson family to be true is that orgies took place, and these were bisexual orgies, anything goes orgies. Some of them also involved rather young girls, which is a bit unsavory, but I mean, the whole thing's unsavory. I don't know why I'm saying
right.
Sex, drugs, murder, young kids living on the street. None of it's particularly good, is it? Like
there are standout moments though, like that one, like the underage girls and boys coming around is,
what's
it's
weird
flagged.
is that, like, I mean, the thing that always shocked the hell out of me is the Angela Lansbury thing, where her daughter Deirdre, who was 14 at the time, and Angela Lansbury of Murder, She Wrote fame, wrote a signed letter to be taken around with her in case she was stopped by the police that said, I, Angela Lansbury, give permission for my daughter Deirdre to travel around America with Mr. Manson and his ministries, as if he was like a sort of traveling preacher or something like that. Later, Deirdre and Tony, which is her son, they got out of the Manson group before the murders started. Principally, though, it wasn't a moral thing. It was because they were both hooked on heroin. And so Angela Lansbury sent them to Ireland, I think, in order to get clean. Well, fortuitous timing for them, really.
Yeah. Wow. And, one of the elements, just going off of this side of it, is like, I always think of just the broken people. I mean, we're dealing with people that are coming from broken homes, even these Hollywood elites. We know that, if you've looked into it, it's like these people have been used, abused, all sorts of stuff has happened to them. So they are so compartmentalized, they're broken, they have weird things with sex and drugs because they use the drugs to escape from the ugliness of their life. And we have a whole group of these people that are like this.
Yeah.
And, you brought it up earlier, but Lynette Fromm's book, Reflection, for those out there who haven't read it, if you're interested in this, I recommend it because she brings insights like this, deeper insights. And it does come from more of an innocent place because she's writing from her perspective.
It's like a coming of age about a teenage girl. It almost wasn't about the Manson. It's a brilliant book. It's so lovely, and that sounds bizarre because it's about a horrible time in American history. But it's written in such a sort of, as you say, almost innocent way that tells a very, very different sort of perspective. There are other books, like was it Wish? Did she do a book, or was it Snake Lake? Was it Diane Lake did a book? And that's bullshit. Like, that's just nonsense. Like, okay, like it's a lot of stuff that would sell to the mainstream version. But the Squeaky Fry book's astonishingly good. It really shocked me when I first read it because, as you say, it's like not what you expect. Not what you expect at all. It's more like a sort of weird coming of age, teenage discovery type book that just so happens to be connected to this massive murder.
Well, and the thing about her book too that I liked was that if you have this stock of information under your belt, when you read it, if you can read between the lines, there's a lot of telling things in there. And then there's also stuff where I wish she would have expanded on, because she'll say something like, Susan Adkins came home and said, all I'm hearing in LA is that Sharon Tate was murdered. And then the chapter ends or something. And I was like, wait, no, what else did she say? She said something else, but
totally.
The reading between the lines of her book really helped me to just even like further connect things, because she goes into detail of remembering the first time that she was pimped out, and when they went through this whole thing, and it's like, okay. And that they're basically like living in abandoned homes. So they were like squatters.
They're eating out of garbage. And that's been sort of latterly sort of like romanticized as like, there's a thing, right? Okay. That, freeganism and skip diving and stuff like that. Like
freeganism. What's freeganism?
Freeganism is the idea that basically you don't ever pay for anything. You can find and reappropriate furniture, whatever you want, basically, by sort of like oh, you won't know the reference. I was going to say like Wombles, but that's a very English thing, right? So like, rather than go to the shop and buy a coffee table, you go down to the local rubbish dump, or you look in skips, or you look in back alleys where people have abandoned stuff, and you either repair it or you reuse it and stuff like that. And then there's this thing called skip diving in England. Sometimes we've got like rubbish, particularly like sort of demolition waste, or sort of if you're getting rid of a load of stuff, you get these big metal tubs called skips. I don't know if you have them in America, and everyone just chucks the rubbish in there and stuff.
We do have something like that. It's not called a skip, but I know what you mean. Yep.
But technically, it's illegal to go through these things and steal it, because like it's theft by finding. But there was a point in the UK where it was terribly fashionable, like to just do that, like all these sort of trustafarian eco warriors and stuff like that. They'd love doing that and say, oh no, we did this entire room in Jacintha for less than £5, and so like a lot of the time it's sort of told like that they were sort of, oh, they were smart, they were like, it's like, yes, to an extent, but let's not muck about. They're taking food out of bins, right? It's not a glamorous way to be. And yeah, I get it. They said that we cut all the dark spots off and we actually eat very, very well. And that was one of the things as well. Like they tried to portray them as sort of starving stuff. And actually went in the police report when they got picked up at both ranches, their larders were, they had a huge amount of food. A pantry, I don't know what you call it in America, where you store all the food. They had loads. They had absolutely loads. So yeah, it's one of those really. But as you say, they were living in poverty. Now, again, because Charlie had come from a sort of life of abject poverty, and because he just come from prison and stuff like that, he was saying, oh, this is absolutely fine and stuff like that. On the other hand, they didn't half move into Dennis's house pretty quick, did they? And then when they had the opportunity to live at like the spiral staircase, they lived there. And the yellow submarine house and stuff like that. They did want to be inside, but basically, I mean, for crying out loud, when they first started, he was in a bus, in
Right.
the little black Volkswagen bus. It was him and Mary and Susan, I think, or him and Mary and Squeaky. I forget. Going round. Do you know they tried to pick up Deborah Harry one time?
Oh no.
Yeah, Debbie Harry of oh Christ, what's their name? The punk band, you know what they're called.
Wait.
It just fell out of my head. They did Dreaming and Heart of Glass.
Oh, Blondie.
Thank you. Yes.
Yeah. There you go.
She turned down lifts from both Charles Manson and Ted Bundy.
Wow.
What's
her
lucky.
deal?
Yeah, again, very, very lucky, really, wasn't she? But like, but yeah, she was offered lifts by both of them and turned them both down, basically. She also used to work as a Playboy bunny at one point as well, Debbie Harry.
Wow. Well, then, man, I feel like, oh my God, I'm so grateful to be talking to you. I feel like there's so many directions to go because you say Playboy Bunny, and then I think about the Playboy Mansion, and I think about all the connections of that too. And that plays a huge role.
Well, we're saying recently all the sort of things that have come out against Hugh Hefner and stuff like that. When he was alive, everybody sort of portrayed him as a sort of Blandy, thank you, as lovable old rogue and stuff like that. And now that he's died, it's kind of like it's a very different thing that's being portrayed, isn't it? Like there's three blonde girls that he used to live with whose names escape me. They're talking about drugs and coercive sex and grubby living habits and stuff like that. And it's all a bit. I mean, it's all a bit strange, isn't it? Like this. Yeah, there's some really grimy stories that come out. Wasn't there a documentary series like Surviving Hugh Hefner or something? It was something like that.
I think so. I never watched it, but I do remember when he was like put on blast a bit.
Yeah.
Like
but it wasn't until he died, though, was it really?
Yeah, right. Which usually happens.
Well, except that raises all sorts of questions, doesn't it? It's like, why did they wait till he died to meet to him? Because are you telling me that people didn't know this beforehand? And like, the way my mind goes is, well, how many people have been in that Playboy mansion? Like, how many people have been in the grotto? What secrets does he know? Like, do you know what I mean? It's I mean, I don't want to go all Jeffrey Epstein and stuff like that. But you know where I'm going with this. Like, you just don't know, do you? Like, and it's saying all these girls that at the time were projecting this, I'm having an amazing time on one of his 3 wives and blah, blah, blah. Now they're all coming across as like, again, it's similarly like none of them came from like brilliant backgrounds and stuff like that. They seem to have sort of gravitated towards this figure, again, due to sort of, I mean, obviously I can't speak for them, but perhaps something missing or like, that they feel underappreciated or whatever.
Right.
Like, and a lot of them have spiraled out of control since then, haven't they, really? Like, having said that, it's Hollywood. Like, show me somebody in Hollywood, and I'll show you somebody that may well spiral out of control, like due to any number of reasons, like the fact that you're always on the top and you're bored, the fact that you used to be on top, the fact that you've never really got there. There's a multitude of reasons that people in that Hollywood system, which is incredibly cruel and it's like a meat grinder. It just chews people up and spits them out. And like, your face is hot this second, and you've got a run of things, and then you just nothing. And it's the worst excesses of the film industry, obviously, but it's also the music industry is there, and then all the tangential industries that come off the back of both of those things. The sex, the drugs, etc., 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 the crime, the protection. Do you know what I mean? It's like this is the thing. This is another thing about the Manson thing. I'm always fascinated in the sleazy underbelly. Like, I was always I love that book Hollywood Babylon, even though most of it is salacious nonsense and whatnot.
Right.
But the guy that I can't even remember his name. There was a fixer that would sort things out in Hollywood. So if Cary Grant accidentally ran a man over or something like that, that'd get swept under the carpet. Not Cary Grant, Clark Gable, sorry. Or like, that sort of thing. Like, and
the cleanup crew. There's like
that kind of thing. But there was a particular guy whose name escapes me, who was like the fixer for it. But this is what you said earlier. Like, just because these people are successful in the public eye, it doesn't necessarily mean that they're not damaged people. They've not come from tragedy. They're just people who've happened to get to this thing. One of the things, I have some very, very unusual interests. One of the things that fascinates me is who in Hollywood wears a wig. Even nowadays, and who in Hollywood has got herpes. And because to me, both of those things are just sort of like, it's not as glamorous as it appears to be, is it? Like, and again, you'd be surprised on both of those counts. Like, you'd be absolutely shocked, some of the people who wear wigs, and you'd be even more shocked, some of the celebrities who've got herpes. But
well, too, and it reminds me, I mean, it kind of, have you gone into like transvestigation at all?
What's that? Sorry?
So basically the concept that there's a lot of like secret trannies in Hollywood.
Okay. No.
And that, which kind of goes along with the wig. It's a rabbit hole we went down a handful of years ago, and it's like, it's a slippery slope too, because then everyone can become a tranny, and then it's like, oh God. And this is no judgment on anyone's choices in life, because you can do whatever the hell you want.
I've seen that conspiracy theory that basically like this glamorous female was actually born a man, or this glamorous male was actually born a female. But to be quite honest, I've never really sort of looked at it any more than I've looked at sort of flat Earth or dinosaurs are fake or something like that. Like,
okay,
I've gone, oh, that's what those people think, is it? Right? Okay, fair enough. Like, so yeah, like that's not my particular cup of tea, but I am aware of it as an idea.
It just isn't. It interests me because to me it goes along more with like this gender bending kind of just mind altering sort of state that they want people in. So like, what are you looking at? What are we really looking at here? Do we really know? And it just like keeping you in this kind of, I don't know, this weird mindset of your.
One of the things that is definitely 100% true is that basically, like, there's a huge amount of closeted actors or actresses, and basically, again, the Hollywood system would not let them be themselves. The famous one being Cary Grant, who lived with Randolph Scott, and various other people, Valentino and oh crikey, they're all Montgomery Clift and Rock Hudson. And there'll be a huge amount, like, I mean, obviously the rumors nowadays surround people like Tom Cruise or John Travolta and stuff like that. And there's an element of truth to this, in as much as when Rupert Everett, I think his name was, decided to come out in Hollywood, he suddenly lost all his leading man roles, basically. So I'm very sorry, there's somebody at my door. I'm just going to be 2 seconds.
Oh yeah, you're good. Do your thing.
Hello.
Thanks everybody for hanging out. This has been a freaking awesome conversation.
Oh, thank you very much. Congratulations, by the way. What is this? Oh, it's that. Sorry, that's my next door neighbour who's just had a baby. There was a parcel dropped off for me at her house.
Yeah, you're good. No worries.
But
Yeah,
so
man.
what were we talking about? Oh, we're talking about, like the point being that the Hollywood system is a closed system, isn't it? And let's not muck about. It's a money-making system. Okay, that's what it's there to do. It's there to make money. And so anything or anyone or anybody or whatever that is going to cause problems for that, they're either going to hush it up or they're going to deny it, essentially. And so be that closeted people, be that people involved in drugs, be that people involved, latterly people involved in sex scandals and stuff like that. How long did it take for Harvey Weinstein to come out? Now, the Hollywood casting couch, that's not a new thing. Everybody knows about the Hollywood casting couch, okay? But they protect themselves because basically an attack on somebody as powerful in the industry as Harvey Weinstein, the concern would be that it brings down the whole of Hollywood. Obviously didn't do that, but this would be the mindset behind protecting people. And like, we know that this person's a bit handsy, we know that this person's a bit wild or whatever, blah blah blah. But let's be honest, they're a massive box office pull, and so this is the thing. And it's not just it's any part of the entertainment industry. In fact, let's not muck about. It's any part of any industry where people make a huge amount of money. Like right. You'll probably find in the banking industry as well, there's people who are known to be grim for whatever reason, and they're still employed or whatever. Or in the fashion industry, I mean, Christ, the fashion industry, like the fashion industry, it's just a massive cover for trafficking girls a lot of the time, basically. So yeah, but again, these industries, they close around themselves, don't they, to protect their own. So this is why again that you have to sort of start picking at things and pulling away at things and stuff like this, and like to find the real truth, because people don't tend to want to air their dirty laundry in public, and so you have to dig a bit for it.
Yeah. And that sentiment of just them protecting their own is like a kind of a great way to conclude just even what the Manson stuff is all about, because that at the end of the day is basically what it is. It's a big protection scheme so that all these people, all these names that we've been mentioning over the past, hour and a half are like protected, and they don't they're not put on blast unless you start to dig. And so that's been one of my biggest fascinations with it, is just to see how blatantly obvious of a cover up it is, but to people who don't know or don't understand or aren't interested in digging, they're not going to ever think that at all. And that's the whole point of it. We can sell him as a boogeyman now, and he'll be a boogeyman forever. And
but this is the thing, like, to my mind, that's all very well and good. It's a cracking story and whatnot, but the actual underneath story, all the sleaze and all the interactions and all these groups and this group and this group, and to me, that's more interesting than the actual story that's been sold.
Totally.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's sort of the point of it. Like, one of the best-selling crime novels or crime books of all time, Helter Skelter, is ostensibly a cover-up of what actually happened in the case, which is crazy if you think about it.
Yeah, it's seriously mind-blowing, but I'm freaking grateful for people like yourself who have dug through it and continue to dig and just continue to come to conclusions and have really great, I mean, just the way you speak about this, I just wanted to say, I really honor it. And I think that it's brilliant. And you do a really great job. And I've thought that forever, but I've listened to multiple interviews with you and everything else. And now talking to you here, I just want you to know that you are doing great work. And as if you didn't know that already, but the way you speak of this is really wonderful. And I can tell that you have a really great understanding of it, because you're able to just, even if you didn't remember a name, you can connect these dots very easily. And that to me is something to be honored. So thanks for that.
Well, thank you. And thank you very much for inviting me on. It was a pleasure. I'd love to come back anytime.
Oh, man, I'd love to have you again, because I feel like we're scratching the surface, but I feel like we totally dug in.
No, we barely even said. This is the problem with the Manson case. Like, I mean, the book itself, like, now is the only thing that's real. It's longer than Crime and Punishment.
Yeah, it is actually. It's a tome, man, and
Yeah.
it's awesome. And I remember when I first got it and ordered it and it came, I read this thing in like a week because I
Did
was just
you?
like, oh God, I was so enthralled, and it was just the point in my life where I was like really, really, really digging into Manson, and I just blasted through it, and I was like, this is seriously one of the best books ever.
Thank you so
And
much.
so anyway, yeah, for people who haven't read it or are curious, I highly recommend it. And they can get on your website, correct?
Yeah, either directly from me, which is neilsandersmindcontrol.com, or off Amazon. But it's me that sells it on Amazon as well. So if anybody
Okay.
buys a copy, you can get it. I'll sign it for you, obviously. Yeah, but it's also available on Kindle. I know a lot of people don't think. The only problem with it, the only slight problem is that basically because I'm in England, the postage is quite high to get it to America. The shipping, it's not super egregious, like, but yeah, it's not cheap. Ooh, love you, minor threat emoji.
Yeah, that's our good buddy Pedro.
Nice.
Yes.
Yeah, big fan. So yeah, but it is available on Kindle or thing. I tell you how you can get it actually. Sorry for the shameless plug, but if
No, plug
you
away. This is your time to plug. So anything
well,
you like.
the podcast that I do, someday I call it Conspiracy. We have various levels of Patreon, and if you go to a certain level of Patreon, you get PDF copies of all my books, including the Manson book. So if you're just so inclined, you could just become a Patreon for 1 month, get the book on PDF, and then never think of it again. But you do get a lot of perks as well with the thing for the podcast. And the podcast is called Some Dare Call It Conspiracy, and it's on all sorts of platforms basically. So yeah, please check that out if so inclined as well.
Yes, awesome. And all your links for that stuff is down below. I did add your Patreon as well for the
Oh, thank you.
podcast. Yeah, so people can find it there. And yeah, just want to say thank you again. I really appreciate your time. And I really look forward to talking to you again. I will be inviting you back, just so you know.
Right, well, I'll be coming back. You can't keep me away now. That's it. I'm sorry. You're going to be sick of me.
Dude, nice. I love it. All right, Neil. Well, thank you so much. And we'll talk to you again soon. Have a really great rest of your night.
Thank you. And thank you everyone for watching.
Yep. Bye-bye. All right, friends. Well, wow. That was awesome. I loved every second of it. And I feel like we could have kept going, but we got to cap it at some point, right? You can't just keep going all the time. You have to end it. So as always, I do have some slides for y'all if you guys want to stick around for updates on my end. And let's bring up this slide here. Come on now. Add to stage. All right. So, patrons, thank you guys so much. As always shouting you guys out. Chance, Sarah G, Liam, Amy, Miri and Hank, Jenny G, Erica, Moonlander Spoons, Mary, Louie, Diane, Logan, Debbie, Natasha, Mary Beth, Nausicaa, Stephanie, Jennifer, Charlai, Peter, Elise and James, and Amy. Thank you guys. You guys are helping me keep the wheels spinning over here at the Healing Home, and it's super appreciated. If you want to become a patron, patreon.com/thehealinghome is how you can do that. All patrons get my newsletter that comes out every month on the full moon. You get the update 1 day ahead of everybody. So it will allow you to place orders for products before everybody else, which is helpful because I make small batches and sometimes stuff sells out really quick. Next week, I have Rose 777 on, which is going to be awesome. And we're going to be talking about the connections we feel with plants and when we use certain medicines that people make, the connection that you feel to the maker and how that actually is medicine in itself. So I'm really excited to have Rose on. So next week on 9/26 at 4 p.m., we will be with Rose. So come and join us here at the Healing Home. Full Moon Offering newsletter comes out. Next issue is on the 29th, which is coming up faster than I can even sometimes feel like keep up with, but we're still here. We're keeping up. I don't mean it that way. I just mean I can't believe how fast this season is going. It's pretty freaking crazy. So on the 29th, we'll have a new one. I've got one of salve left. My skin and wound healing balm is still available, but the pink grapefruit salt soap is sold out. So if you're wanting a salve that is going to help with wounds and skin health and all over just wonderful moisturizing, that's the one. You can hit me up for that. I'm actually going to be making soap right after I get off this stream, so there'll be more batches coming for y'all. Up on the screen here is my menu. If you're interested in any of the stuff that I have still available from the past newsletter offerings, you can check that out up here. And for orders, you can email me, michelleshealinghome@gmail.com. You can ask me questions, anything else. You can schedule a consultation through email as well. michelleshealinghome.com for all other information. If you want to read my blog, get some recipes, find out what my offerings are, you can do that. You can also call or text me 503-568-1569, and that is my Google Voice number, so it will come to me via email. So a lot more people have been using the number, which is awesome. I really like doing that. Last Thursday, our last episode was the Woodstock experiment, and our good buddy Pedro, who's in the chat right now, joined us for that one, and we had a good time breaking down basically what was Woodstock. Was it a genuine event? Was it a psyop? Was it a combination of both? I'm convinced it was some sort of experiment personally, but we did that last Thursday on the Healing Home. We won't have an episode this week, but we will have one next week, the following week. So you can check that out if you wanted to hear our insights on Woodstock and see how that all went. I had a good time, and it's one of my favorite subjects to talk about. So it was really fun to bring Pedro into the fold. We also learned some lessons too, just with having a guest, how to arrange the chairs, get a third mic, and so just like with everything in life, you are not able to understand how something's going to work until you do it, right? That's how it goes sometimes. And so we learned some lessons with that one, and that was good for many reasons. So it was really fun as always. Symbolicstudies.com for all things Mario. You can head over to his website and check him out, see what he's doing. Also just check him out and see what's happening coming down the pipeline for Symbolic Studies. Very exciting. And that, I think, will bring us to the end. This was so wonderful. And as I said multiple times, even leading up to this interview, I have been just so excited to talk to Neil. And this was great. And I had a really good time. I feel like we flowed really well together. And I'm excited in the future to invite him back, because not only is he just Pedro says, glad to have been an experiment. Nice. That's funny. Yeah, totally. Yeah. But it's all love over here. So, but it was, that's kind of what it was. It was like, we're testing this shit out. So let's go. Yeah. So Neil, just wonderful. I mean, he's a wealth of information. So really check out his work, his podcast that he does with his buddy. He's got other books and stuff, as we talked about, but I look forward to having him on in the future, because I know that there's other things that we could talk about besides the Manson stuff, as we did already today. But I think with the Manson stuff, that is where my real interest lies with his work. And his other work is brilliant, but it all ties together so freaking well, because when we're working with mind control and MK Ultra and propaganda and all the things that he's really into and has talked about for years, it's kind of actually no surprise that he ended up on the Manson case, because this stuff is all just tied together so well. So, with all that said, I had a great time, and I think he did too. So I'm very excited to talk to him more in the future. And with all that, I am going to leave you guys and say we'll see you next week with Rose 777, and have a great day. This was a nice early stream, which is nice. It changes up the day, so I'm looking forward to it. All right, y'all. Take care, and we'll see you soon.